Just like that, there were 8. Welcome to the Raw Rugby Podcast Rapid Fire Edition. I'm Nick Wasiliev, back in the hosting booth for the second time in as many weeks. No Christy Doran again this week. He's currently, as we saw on the podcast on Tuesday with Matt Tamua, is enjoying a beautiful chateau in France. But I'm here in a cold, bitterly freezing, rainy Southern Highlands, and I am joined by the one and only Tony Harper. Tony, how are we feeling? We're finally on the final strip home.
Well, I'd rather Christie's life right now. I think Steve Lenthal, one of our fantastic bloggers, referred to him earlier today as the Biarritz battler, which kind of summed him up. He sent me a few photos of beautiful landscapes behind him. I can exclusively report that his shirt was off and that he does need to tend to that garden up a bit up top. I also, puzzlingly, he has not been able to turn up for this podcast, and yet he has appeared on an ESPN podcast today that he does with Sam Bruce. And also, Nick, you're a moonlighter as well, off on the dropped. Come on, help me out here.
Dropped Kickoff, yes. I that's my OG podcast.
Kickoff. I'm just kind of wondering where my side hustle comes in. Why no one's actually come along and scooped me up to appear on the 8-9 combo or one of those other excellent podcasts that are going around. But anyway, you're right. It's a rapid fire edition. I think the reason I'm not on those podcasts is because I tend to waffle. Christy had to flee France to get away from it. You're doing a magnificent job putting up with the crap that comes out of my mouth from time to time. So
let's talk finals.
Yeah. Finals. Yeah.
And the question before we begin, because I feel like, when it's knockout footy, anything can sort of happen. And we usually like to give our tips on this. But the general consensus I've had from all the commenters on Facebook, on social media, there are a lot of you. There's a lot of you folks out there on Twitter, generally speaking, is bar the Reds-Chiefs game in Hamilton this weekend, everyone is looking at the other 3 matches as we have one relative favourite being the top 3 sides at the top of the ladder. We won't do necessarily tips, at the end of each discussion here, but do we agree, Tony? Do we agree? Are these quarterfinal matches as cut and dry as people say?
Well, I respect you not tangling with me in tips, seeing that when it comes to the tipping panel, you're in first and I'm a long way distant last. So thanks for doing that. So I'll restrict my commentary to the play-up betting odds, which I find probably a lot more accurate as well. And they would tell us that story that you just painted there. We might just start at the top, and I'll incorporate the odds as we roll through, if you like, and then give an idea of what kind of what the bookmakers at least are expecting, along with most of the tipsters this week.
I think that sounds like an excellent idea. And of course, we kick off on Friday, just the one match on the Friday evening, which is a match that I got a feeling a lot of folks, but on both sides of the Tasman, are very keen for, which is the Chiefs and the Reds. These two have been building up pretty much since the Reds picked up a surprise victory in New Plymouth last year, have been developing a very good little rivalry between them. Of course, the Chiefs knocked them out of the quarterfinals, but then the Reds came back earlier this year and beat the Chiefs at Suncorp Stadium. And so I think we're in for a great match. What are some of the changes for Les Kiss's side, Tony?
Yeah, well, firstly on Les Kiss, I've been listening to a lot of what he's had to say over the past few weeks and talking about the development of his team. Nick, I can't kind of work out whether he's an absolute genius who's timing this race to absolute perfection, or whether he just talks a good game and he wants everyone to believe that. He has brought back Tom Liner. He's chopped and changed his number 10 quite a lot through this season. He's had 3 of them going at it. He's brought Tom Liner back into number 10, Lawson Crichton covering off the bench, which he says is the best balance for it. And Liner, of course, stepped up last week against the Waratahs and potted that 48-metre winning penalty shortly after having missed a very simple one from in front that no one ended up talking about. So, to me, that's a big, it's going to be a big part of this game if we assume that it might be quite close. John Bryant, the youngster, returns at number 8. Ryan Smith, the turnover king, he's coming back into the lock. Jeffrey Tumaga Allen is coming in off the bench. Returns from the bench back to the starting line. Queensland have won 3 out of 5 against the Chiefs since 2021. The Chiefs are brought in Tupou Vaiai, Samasoni Tukahau at hooker. ALB is back in the centres. So the odds here, the Chiefs are paying $1.20 to the Reds $4.60, and the line is set at 11.5 points there. So it's obviously seen as quite a tight affair there. How are you seeing that one unfolding?
I think, look, I am not a betting man myself, but those odds are very, I'm quite surprised that the margin is wider there for the Reds, because even in the quarterfinal loss last year, it was a much closer game, very much an arm wrestle for pretty much the majority of the match. There's something about the Reds. I think Matt Tamua made a great point on the Tuesday podcast, which was that, if there's one team that the Reds would probably be happy to be playing against if they had to go across the ditch, it would be the Chiefs, hands down, because they've got a feeling of confidence, not just to match up physically, but also mentally. They can trust themselves to execute a quality game plan. I think the Reds are going to be a decent shot here. I mean, of course, playing in Hamilton is a very difficult affair. I think the last time an Australian side won there actually was the Brumbies back in 2022. And so I would say the Chiefs would still be favourites being at home, but I think this is going to be a thriller. I reckon this is going to be a margin decided by less than a try.
Yeah, and we want to see that try go to the Junkyard Dog, don't we? He's absolutely flying. He's out there on the wing along with Matt Greeley, which means that Les Kiss, who was asked about this in his press conference a couple of days ago, has decided not to include Suliasi Vunivalu, possibly coming to the end of his time as as an option up there if he can't get in over these guys at this stage. It's a real career point for him after obviously missing a week through suspension with those double trips in Fiji. He's now been ignored for 2 weeks running. Kiss is not afraid to make tough calls. He's done it again. As I said up top, I'm just kind of wondering still, I think the jury's out a bit still on whether he has timed this right. I think he would be perhaps a little disappointed that they didn't win a couple of those closer games earlier in the season, and they are having to travel across to play in New Zealand. You talk about the odds being separate there. An Australian team hasn't won a final in New Zealand for 28 years. So, there's probably a bit of that built into that.
Yes, true that. I think, it will be a tough mountain for Kiss to climb. I think all intensive purposes for a first season, I think it's been extremely promising, offering some very good, promising, good shoots coming through, some clear progression in the side from Brad Thorne's time as coach. And I think if you're a Queensland fan, regardless of the result this weekend, there's a lot to be excited about in this side and a lot to be excited about going forward, particularly under the guidance of Les Kiss. Continuing on, we move to Saturday. We have a Super Saturday, 3 matches that'll join over the course of the day. And, of course, first up is 1st versus 8th. The Hurricanes will be hosting the Melbourne Rebels at the Cake Tin at 2:35 kickoff, Australian Eastern Standard Time. Potentially the last match ever if you are a Melbourne Rebels fan. We are in knockout territory. And while it is fantastic to see the Rebels finally make a finals berth, it does feel very, if you are a Rebels fan, this is an imposing place to play considering how both sides are coming into this match, Tony.
This is an odds line that you perhaps won't be surprised by, Nick. The Hurricanes are at $1.02, the Rebels at $21. The line is 27.5. After losing their first ever meeting in 2011, the Hurricanes have won 11 straight over the Rebels with an average margin of 26 points per game. So that 27.5 is not far off that. The Rebels do welcome back Carter Gordon after a couple of weeks missing through concussion issues. Rob Leota was expected to struggle to get up for this one, but he was also cleared in a major boost for Kevin Foote. They've picked Isaac Kalea at number 1 ahead of Matt Gibbon, and they've moved Andrew Kellaway back to number 15. There are 2 changes from the Hurricanes after their win over the Highlanders. Justin Sangster replaces James Tucker at lock. Peter Lakai at number 7, replacing Duplessis Karifi. Salesi Reasi, after his hat-trick last time out, he has maintained his spot on the wing to the surprise of absolutely no one. It does seem like this is last chance saloon for the Rebels. A sad moment for them. They've been running on emotion. I can't imagine what that will be like, and for them when it all unfolds. Any chance at all?
Always. Of course you're always a chance. I mean, you've still got to play the game. You've still got to go out there. And part of me does hope that being where they are, they won't be daunted by... They've got nothing to lose, literally nothing to lose in this situation, and everything to gain. So if you are a Rebels player who, against all odds, is listening to this podcast, honestly, you have no fear to play. I reckon just go out and play as hard as you possibly can if you are in that situation. Having said that, look, if you look at the last couple of rounds, I mean, the Rebels are currently sitting on a 6-match losing streak. Their last victory was against the Highlanders in round 8, which... definitely doesn't suggest that momentum is currently with them or any sort of strong performance. But the Hurricanes, by comparison, have been playing very, very well.
Yeah, and in a way they got fortunate, the Hurricanes, to be in this position of first, which should see them all the way through to a home final, with the Blues blowing up the late concession last week. So you're right, things are going their way. I kind of feel that the Rebels... they went to Fiji. They travelled on the day that they were cut from Super Rugby. They threw everything they could into the opening stages, and then they were just absolutely swept away by Drua last week. And that's a hard thing to come back from there. As Les Kiss mentioned the week before, no one wins after the week after going to Fiji. But not only to come back from Fiji, they're not at home. They're going away to the top team. I think that would be a miracle that they would make movies about young Nick.
Yes, they would. You'd have to go Hurricanes in that particular match. And that leads us very nicely onto the second game that is happening in New Zealand, this quarterfinals, which is, of course, the Blues going up against the Fijian Drua, which kicks off at 5:05 p.m. Straight in. Get on board. It's a perfect weekend of knockout footy. Of course, the Blues missing out due to conceding a try in the final closing stages of last week's match against the Chiefs, which denies them finishing in first place, which Vern Cotter and the team, they looked like they'd just lost everything coming off the field after that match. But they're coming up against a Drua side that has not won on the road since round 1, 2023, and that match was against Moana Pacifica. Despite the Fijians' clear talent and incredible ability that they have shown at home, on the road, it's another kettle of fish, isn't it, Tony?
So here's one. The Rebels aren't the biggest outsider this weekend, even though you'd suggest that they probably were. The Drua are paying $23 to the Blues, $1.02.
No way.
In this one. So no one in bookmaker land seems to give them a chance. The Blues have won 25 of their past 27 matches at Eden Park, including their last 13 in a row. The Drua have never, ever played at Eden Park as a Super Rugby Pacific team of 3 years standing. So this is their first visit there. So they have no hoodoo to break, at least, if you're going to look on the bright side. A couple of changes for the Blues. Josh Bearer replaces Sam Darry. He misses out due to concussion. Rico Ione, one of my favourite players of all time. Nick, I've got to say I love watching that guy play. I was deprived of that last week because he did pull out at the last gasp, but he is apparently back and fit to partner AJ Lamb in the midfield. They've moved Harry Plummer back to 10, Stephen Perifetta to 15. That's a reversal of how they lined up last week. The Drua, meanwhile, have exactly the same 15 that torched the Rebels. So Mick Byrne's team at least has stability in its ranks coming into this one.
Yes, indeed. And unfortunately, I'm going to have to agree with you on this particular one in terms of the Drua being an outsider. I think also the fact that the Blues are one of the few teams in the last 2 seasons to have beaten the Drua in Fiji, which is a very tough assignment to do. And the Drua have never currently tasted victory over the Blues since coming into this competition. You'd have to say, even though you'd hope that they might rise to the occasion when it's finals time, they certainly were able to do that in fantastic fashion in both the likes of competitions like Super Rugby Women's or the NRC a long time ago. They'd always live for the occasion, but playing at such a difficult fortress that is Eden Park, even if it is against the Blues, it's a tough place to win at the best of times. I think we're probably both in agreement that the Blues will be heavy, heavy favourites for that match. That leads us nicely into the final match of the weekend. Of course, we're talking about third place versus sixth, and realistically speaking, not outside the realms of possibility, but realistically speaking, the final Super Rugby match on Australian soil. If we predict the results to go the way they are, which is of course the Brumbies playing the Highlanders at 7:35 p.m. kickoff in Canberra. Make sure you bring a jumper. Make sure you bring a beanie. It's going to be cold down in the national capital. Talk us through the squads, Tony.
Firstly, the Brumbies are at $1.12, Highlanders $6.25, which seems, that seems realistic to me going there. Charlie Cale is back from injury for Stephen Larkham's team. It's a big test for Harry Vella in the number 1 jersey with the Brumbies 2 Wallabies loose heads, James Slipper and Blake Shott, having been injured in the last couple of weeks. So plenty of pressure on the young guy up front. Tom Hooper, who has been kind of moving in and out of the second row and onto the side of the scrum in the last few weeks, he will start at lock alongside Darcy Swain. Interesting move there with Nick Frost coming off the bench. Look, there's wholesale changes for the Highlanders. I won't go through many of those. They've got 5 changes in the back line, a few more up in the forwards. The Highlanders aren't great travellers to Australia, just as the Australian teams aren't great travellers to across the ditch the other way. The Highlanders have won 1 of their past 9 games in Australia. The last time they came here was a 31-0 loss to the Reds. So look, I think the Brumbies should advance. I think they've got the team and they've been the best of the Australian franchises. I think the Reds have shown glimpses but not been consistent enough, whereas the Brumbies have managed to grind out a lot of quite, close games at times as well, but just seem to have developed a winning culture. And I know you'll be happy to see them march on again, Nick.
Well, look, even though when it comes finals footy, I'm never comfortable until the final whistle is blown, even when we're ahead 30 points to 13, or in some regards, because you never know what can happen. It's the rugby player in me. But adding to that point, I will say the Brumbies have a pretty decent record. They've won their last 3 matches in a row against the Highlanders. Even more of note, 2 of those games were in Dunedin, which kind of suggests that there is. They do have a bit of a rub of the green over the Highlanders right now. These matches also typically have been quite high-scoring affairs, so lots of points scored, lots of tries with attack. Usually the case of defence sometimes on some occasions going out the window and both sides just throwing everything in the kitchen sink at each other. So I expect an entertaining match in Canberra. I think it'll be a really fun game for everyone to watch and check out. I would definitely say, even though I've been very impressed, I think the Highlanders have grown a lot this season compared to years past, particularly the likes of Taniela Talia, Cameron Miller, and Folau Fakatava especially. I think he's been outstanding this season for the Highlanders, and there's clearly a side that is growing and developing, particularly breaking that losing streak against Kiwi sides. But I don't see them right now, both with the starting squad and with the bench, being able to have the firepower to overwhelm the Brumbies, particularly in Canberra, where I also discovered recently that the Brumbies have only lost at home since the start of this iteration of Super Rugby Pacific on 3 occasions, which is a very imposing record. So I will be going Brumbies for this one. Not the I mean, that's expected. The reality is that's where I was always going to go. But
that's the head, that's the head and the heart. Yeah,
it is.
You've got both sides covered there. Look, it might not be the end of the road just for the Rebels. Incidentally, the fact that they are not going to be in the competition next year means it'll be 11 teams. So it appears that the Super Rugby Commission met during the week, and we're doing away with these quarterfinals, the 8 teams from 12 going through. There's a story up on the raw.com.au if you want to check that out. There are a couple of models being looked at, one being that the top 2 teams get a week's rest and the 4 teams below them play off to then play those teams. And then probably the one that's more appealing to the broadcasters is the top team sits out. This is based on NFL. The top team sits out, the next 6 play each other, and then we go into a round of finals from there, semis from there, because by my calculations, it adds about 3 extra games, which obviously would be quite appreciated by Stan if they're losing one of their franchises. But look, we say farewell to a quarterfinal setup that has completely divided the fan base. Some people like the fact that the Rebels with, 2 or 3, maybe 4 wins this season could scrape in and play knockout footy. A lot of other people find it's a bit like everyone gets a participation award at your local primary school. But look, that aside, a couple of major, widespread margins in the betting markets, at least. There are at least a couple of games there, both involving Australian teams, which should really, be rocking this weekend for us, Nick.
Absolutely. And I can say, even though, such a finals model has divided a lot of fans, it has made it did make the final fortnight of the competition extremely interesting, both to write about and to see the reactions on.
Well, it would have been gone 4 weeks ago, right? It would have been all done and dusted. To me, it's a bit like promotion and relegation in football. You need that extra aspect, and they can't do that, obviously, in Super Rugby, but the 8 allowed people to dream, although you kind of wonder if the Rebels players who got on that plane and headed over to New Zealand this week were like, oh, have we not had enough yet?
It's definitely going to be one to watch as we see the whole situation unfold, not just with what the competition is going to look like going forward, but finals as well. Tony, thanks again for your time. Appreciate our week in, week out coverage. We're slugging it out even when our rugby editor is off drinking champagne in
I've got to talk to the person I've just got to talk to the person who signed off on that leave sheet and ask him what he was thinking when he did that. So anyway, he has a lot of days to catch up on when he gets home, Nick.
But for all of our listeners, we hope you are enjoying the coverage of Super Rugby Pacific and the quarterfinals. How exciting, getting to the business end of the season, and soon we'll be talking about those men and girls as well in green and gold. Time to get excited.